My name's Amy. I'm from Wheatbelt NRM. The purpose of this project was to try and increase the beetle blanket in the wheatbelt of Western Australia.
If you've got healthy dung beetles on your property, you are streets ahead on soil health before you've even lifted a finger. And what they do for soil health is really quite extraordinary. They bring carbon into the soils, they increase water infiltration. They're doing a host of different functions for soil health.
Your dung beetles will fly. They will only travel a certain distance. You need a network of producers who have those dung beetles to naturally spread that species throughout the wheat belt is the plan. If we're aware of our dung beetles and our dung beetle species and we're putting things in place that allow them to grow in population, then the idea is that they will spread naturally without any intervention. But we're going to try and help them along the way by building some little colonies, increasing their populations, feeding them and then releasing them. Absolutely every livestock producer should be implementing practices that continue and grow their dung beetle populations. So the idea behind this nursery is that it's based off a 1 cube IBC. The IBC is pretty easy to find, especially on farm. Most people have got IBCs lying around from chemical, and it's pretty easy to just give them a wash out and fill them with some sand. As we're about to show you, very easy to prepare. It's fully transportable. The benefit is that we can farm the beetles inside of this, and there's definitely no predators are going to get in underneath, and we're going to try and get a really good seal on top so that we don't have any predators coming in on the top. We've selected an IBC which has a drainage out the bottom. We don't want that to get blocked and fill up with water, otherwise our beetle young will die. But if you keep an eye on your drainage and you're checking your beetles daily, that shouldn't be an issue. You can have multiple numbers of these IBCs with different species of beetle in them. Some people have used them up, hundreds and hundreds of these IBCs with different species of beetles in a serious dung beetle farm. So it's fully scalable and pretty easy to relocate as well if you've got a machine.
We've got the IBC, and what we're going to do is we're going to remove this strut across the front here, which is just zipped out with a star drive. Once we get that out, I've marked this out already. What we're trying to retain is at least 100 to 150 mil from the plain surface of the IBC. So we've got something quite substantial to work with, and a large enough opening in the top of the IBC so you've got access for climbing up if you need to, or standing on something to apply the dung into the top of it and get the soil through the top. That's 140 mil. Yep. So that's the first mark. Back up to there. There's 140 mil, it's out ever so slightly. And then you'll do the same on the other side. At 140 mil, and there's 140 mil there. This is just a star drive. And then it's just a matter of following the line of where we marked it up. There's a cutout from the top of the IBC. There's obviously multiple ways to do that. I use a circular saw because it's what I'm used to using in my trade, but the end result is that you end up with a square hole. This still supports the IBC box. We've removed this one that ran across there, and now we're ready to build it up to make a hinged cover so that you've got access into the IBC, but it closes to retain the beetles. We're now going to frame out the top with some timber. For this purpose, we're using a 65 by 19 H3 fence paling. They're square end, they're relatively inexpensive. Because we have this dip down going on here, we need to cut a packer to go in there to bring it up to one level. Then we're going to frame that out with a strut across the back and then make a picture frame lid that will hinge backwards and forwards and lift up. Start with the 245 cuts on the end of this to make it a clean, tidy join. Because of the nature of the beetles, they're quite small. We want to make sure that the whole thing is sealed so that they can't get out unless we want them escaping to distribute into the fields. I'm going to seal this in with silicone before I screw it off to make sure that it's properly sealed and there's no ability for the beetles to escape unless it's when we want them escaping. A bit of excess isn't going to matter. I'd leave it on there to make sure it's a good seal rather than go cleaning it off. And then even these two side pieces, the faces of the timber should meet neatly, but along that edge. So we've got a bit of a gap in the back there, which we're going to fill up here. So now we'll fix it into place. Just pinning those off to that. So that's pinned through the two battens of timber, the packer and the fixed part of the frame. So I'm just using this for ease. If you haven't got a C1 brad, you can do all this with screws, and it's just as easy to do with a screw. I'll change tools in a minute to show you. You just pre-drill slightly. Just a guide drill bit for the screws to get started easier. These are just a 6 to 10G 30mm screw that go through and straight through the plastic. You probably get away with a shorter screw. If at any stage you're going to get inside the box to clean it out, I would probably back cut the screws underneath so there's no chance of you catching yourself on them. The back bar is still held in to the IBC. I'm siliconing that back bar in to reduce any escape route that may be there. So I'm just drilling this through. Like I said, there's multiple ways to fix it. I'm just going to put a fastening through there to give it a bit more connectivity. That's the frame for the lid on the IBC. It's got a nice seal of silicone all the way around it. I've smoothed it out a little bit just to make it look a bit more attractive. Nothing's going to get out of there now. It's completely sealed to the top of the IBC and screwed off. The excess screw ends that have come through onto the inside, I just tap them and peen them with a hammer so that they're not a danger to anyone that may end up going in there to clean out the IBC. So now we get on with building the lid, which is basically just a simple frame with mitered corners, a fly screen on and hinges. We've now just cut 4 pieces of timber. They're the correct size to make a hatch, rebaited in from the edge ever so slightly. We're going to screw that together and put fly screening on it. That's pretty straightforward. It's got a 45 at either end. It's the correct size to fill the space, and there's 4 of them. We're just going to run a screw through the side of them at the moment, and that's adequate for the purpose. We've got Tough Light fly screening. It's more durable than the standard nylon fly screen you buy. If you buy it from a wholesaler, it's not that much more expensive. You can buy it in fairly large quantities if you're going to make a load of these at a very reasonable price. It's just a heavy duty aluminium fly screen. It's not going to rust, it's not going to fade or taint, and it's not going to deteriorate in the weather. And all we're going to do with that is take it nice and clean to the edge, and with a standard staple gun and a 10mm staple, we're just going to put a bit of tension on it. And now we've got that fairly neatly seated. We'll take it off, trim round it slightly, and then just put all the staples in and staple her up. And
there's the lid fabricated.
So we've just got some batten which is 35 by 8-9 mil thick. We've just cut that to square off the top edge so that it seals the edge of the fly screening in place, just so there's not an edge there that other things can get in and damage your nursery and your beetles inside there. We'll put that on with some silicone and some lightweight pins and pin that in place, and then that's a nice sealed lid. You can use anything to hinge this on. It doesn't have to be these hinges. They're just a set of 200mm T hinges that we can manage to get to work for us. We'll just use the CCA treated hinges screws we have.
The carpenter has done a beautiful job on finishing off the hinging. He's finished it off lovely around here so that no beetles are going to be escaping out the lid. It needs a bit of a rinse. If you've got a chemical IBC, it needs a good wash with detergent. To prevent the drainage bung from blocking up, we're going to put a couple of layers of folded shade cloth in the bottom. It's super important that we make sure the bung stays clear and the ability to drain the IBC, especially if you're deciding to leave the IBC out in the open where it gets rained on. The top is rain permeable. Where you put your IBC is probably very important too, because obviously if it's on a full sun day in the middle of the sun on a 40-degree day, you might just boil your beetles. Possibly a dappled shade position. It could be under a tree. You'd obviously have to be aware of the drainage, or it could be under a shed but getting a little bit of light and sun in the morning or something like that. Might be a suitable situation. We will fill this with a loam soil. The dung beetles love a loam soil because they like to be able to tunnel without their holes falling in, so you need to have a clay content in there for them to be able to do that. Then we're going to fill the soil up and then we'll stock it with beetles. So once you've been feeding and managing your beetle nursery for a year or a couple of breeding cycles and you feel like your beetle farm is teeming with life, you might want to release your beetles into your farm. So it's very important that you're releasing the beetles when they're active and you can see you're feeding them lots and there's lots of activity. It might be a good time to release them. You can just pick up the IBC with your tractor, take it to the paddock that has cows or sheep or horses that you want them to eat the dung of, and then just lift the hatch and allow them to release over a day or two. Or if you're less than a kilometre away from an animal source, you can just open the hatch and they'll fly out when they're active. 1,000 beetles is probably about the minimum amount that you want to release in the paddock at any one time. And because beetles are quite expensive, this can be an effective way of building your numbers up without having to spend thousands of dollars on buying the beetles in. A cheap and easy way to get your beetle numbers up or try a new species. We hope that some of you want to give it a crack and look at increasing your beetle blanket. Having a good dung beetle population will have benefits for everyone. We believe this is just the beginning. We really need everyone to get on board, and anyone who's a livestock producer should be interested in what dung beetle species they've got and increasing their numbers on their property to try and bury more dung and improve their soil.